Shall we begin?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If you remember, last time when we met in this virtual mode, I just gave you an overview of what Marxism is all about, a very short summary of what Marxism is, and the relationship between Marxism and literature, and how does one approach a particular text or a particular phenomenon from a Marxist perspective. And I told you that Marxism is a materialist philosophy, meaning that Marxism does not believe in any kind of spiritual or transcendental reality above the material world. In fact, all the kind of spiritual thing that we talk of, that also Marxism interprets as, as a product of material conditions, okay, and the historical conditions. So everything has to be, in the sense, seen from a historical perspective. That's what we talked about. And I told you that the concept of sorry, the concept of ideology is very central to Marxism and Marxist cultural and social analysis. The essay that has been prescribed to you, a very long essay, Ideology and its Vicissitudes in Western Marxism. Vicissitudes means the changing meaning of ideology, okay, in Western Marxism. So before we study what actually, how the meaning of ideology has been changing, okay, and what does it mean, okay, what does this changing meaning mean, we need to understand that why Terry Eagleton, the author of this essay, uses the term Western Marxism. Marxism is Marxism, so why Western Marxism? What is this Western Marxism? So until or unless we understand what this Western Marxism is all about, okay, so we won't be able to get the crux of that essay. Now, Western Marxism is a term, okay, for the various schools of Marxist thought that have flourished in Western Europe, okay, since Marx's death in 1883. Now, it is this term, Western Marxism, is more narrowly used to refer to those Marxist philosophers whose, thinking was influenced by the Hegelian idea of dialectics. Hegel, you all know, was a philosopher, and Marx was tremendously influenced by the philosophy of Hegel. Okay, and so Western Marxism, okay, so you see, Western Marxism does not denote any kind of a specific doctrine, okay, but it is a kind of Marxism which is, which is shaped primarily by the failure of socialist revolution in the Western world. If you remember that there was in 1917, okay, there was this Russian Revolution, and this Russian Revolution was the first attempt to bring Marxist ideas into practice. Okay, Vladimir Lenin, okay, he, they used the idea of Marxist revolution in Russia, okay, and overthrew the Tsar regime, okay, and what is now called the Soviet Union was formed, okay, which was the first, communist state. Okay, so this is a revolution. So it borrows ideas from Marx that capitalist economies will it is inevitable that one day will come when the capital, the proletariat, the working class will rise and overthrow the, the capitalist class. It is inevitable. It is part of history. You can't stop it. Okay, so this was a successful attempt at implementing Marxist revolution, okay, Marxist idea of revolution in Soviet Union. But simultaneously also we see there has a lot of, there has been a failure of this kind of socialist revolution in the Western world. Okay, in the Western world, this kind of revolution failed. Okay, now, so what happens is that these Western Marxists, now they are less concerned with the actual, political or economic practice of Marxism. They are more concerned with the philosophical interpretation. Okay, the philosophical interpretation, especially in relation to cultural and historical studies. Okay, so Western Marxism is a kind of a current, okay, current of Marxist theory, which that arose from Western and Central Europe, okay, after the 1917 October Revolution in Russia. Okay, now the term Western Marxism, it denotes a loose collection of theorists and theories who advanced a particular interpretation of Marxism, which was very different from the Soviet brand of Marxism. Okay, or what we call the Orthodox Marxism. Okay, because you see, the Orthodox Marxism, if you look at it, last time I told you, Orthodox Marxism believes that society is a dual structure. There is a base and there is a superstructure. Okay, so they believe, Orthodox Marxism believes that the superstructure, which includes culture, religion, literature, everything, is directly determined by the economic base. The base is economic. So they believe that, Orthodox Marxists believe that if you want to understand anything in the superstructure, for example, if you want to understand literature or culture or a film, let's say, you will have to primarily focus on the economic base. What is the economic base? This is Orthodox. Okay, so, but Western Marxism, as I told you, it is less concerned with economic analysis, okay, of the earlier kind of Orthodox kind of schools. Okay, but what Western Marxism does is that it emphasizes on the study of the cultural trends of capitalist society. Okay, they are more concerned with the analysis of the superstructure rather than the base. Okay, they employ or deploy, let's say, the philosophical and the subjective aspects of Marxism. Okay, and they also incorporate non-Marxist ideas, which are not Marxist, okay, or non-Marxist approaches to investigate how culture works, how, culture, how the historical development of culture takes place. So you see the difference between Orthodox Marxism and Western Marxism is this. The Orthodox Marxism believes that all kind of cultural development and historical development, all these things are finally derived from the economic base. So if you want to understand any kind of cultural development or anything of the superstructure, you need to actually analyze the economic base. This is the Orthodox Marxism. Soviet brand of Marxism believed in this, Orthodox Marxism. Okay, but the Western Marxism, they believe something else. He said that we have to primarily focus on the superstructure, how culture works. Okay, how this superstructure works, and for that you can also include, non-Marxist approaches, also incorporate non-Marxist approaches into the Marxist framework. Okay, so this is one especially, and that's why the Western Marxists, what they do is that they borrow a lot of idea from the German philosopher, whose name is William Friedrich Hegel. Okay, and and especially they are more concerned with what we call the earlier writings of Karl Marx before he wrote Capital. Okay, the most famous work that he wrote. Okay, so before that he wrote, when he was young, he also wrote many other essays. So they concentrate more on what they call the young Marx. Okay. In fact, Alcuzar has an essay called the Young Marx. Okay. Now, some of the very early proponents of Western Marxism are, the most important thing is more important thinker is George Lukács. Okay, the first thinker. We will try to see what does he mean when he talks about Western Marxism and what is the meaning of ideology according to George Lukács. Okay, George Lukács and Antonio Gramsci. Okay, Antonio Gramsci, where they were actually political activists. Okay, and these people, and along with other people like Walter Benjamin, Theodor Adorno, okay, Herbert Marcuse, these are the thinkers, okay, who are proponents of what we call the Western Marxism. So Western Marxism was born from the failure of the proletariat revolution in various advanced capitalist societies in Western Europe. For example, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy. There also, they tried to emulate, copy the kind of revolution that happened in Soviet Union. But there the revolution did not succeed as it succeeded in Soviet Union. So these thinkers, they tried to find out why this has happened. Why did this revolution succeed in Soviet Union? Why this Marxist revolution succeeded in Soviet Union, and why didn't it succeed in these advanced capitalist societies like Germany or Austria or Hungary? Okay, so Western Marxism, you see, if you want to fix a date to Western Marxism, no, it originated in 1923. Okay, when George Lukács, who was a Hungarian thinker, he was from Hungary, okay, who wrote a book called History and Class Consciousness. History and Class Consciousness. So that is the origin of what we call the Western Marxism. Along with George Lukács, we have another thinker called Karl Koch. Okay, Karl Koch, K-O-R-S-C-H, Karl Koch, who wrote a book called Marxism and Philosophy. Okay, so both these books were published in 1923, and Western Marxism begins with the publication of these books. Okay, in these books, what Lukács and Koch did was that they offered a kind of Marxism, okay, which was more Hegelian. Understand? They borrowed ideas from Hegel. Okay, so they emphasized those aspects of Marx theory, okay, which Marx borrowed from Hegel. Okay, and they argued that Marxism is not simply a theory of political economy. Okay, Orthodox Marxism believes that it is a theory of political economy, but these thinkers, they argue that Marxism is not just simply a theory of political economy. Okay, so it is neither a scientific kind of a sociology. Okay, now Marxism is primarily, for Western Marxists like George Lukács, what is Marxism? Marxism is a critique. Okay, critique. C-R-I-T-I-Q-U. It is a critique. It's a philosophical critique. It is a critique. It is a self-conscious, which helps in the self-conscious transformation of society. Okay, so Marxism has a very broad definition according to this Western Marxist. Okay, that Marxism is primarily a critique, a self-conscious transformation of society, a society which is conscious of its transformation. That is what Marxism does. Okay, they believe that Marxism does not make philosophy, obsolete. Okay, because they believe, Orthodox Marxism believes that Marx said that philosophers, are useless. So he said, no, say that Marxism does not make philosophy obsolete. Okay, rather they said that Marxism preserves the truth of philosophy, okay, until their revolutionary transformation takes place. Okay, revolutionary transformation. So that means what these people do is that these Western Marxists, as I said, George Lukács and all those names I have said earlier, they don't emphasize, they downplay the primacy of economic analysis. Okay, the economic analysis, that the primacy, so what they did, where the base and of capitalist economy is the focus of the earlier Marxists, Western Marxists concentrate on the problems of the superstructures, whereas Orthodox Marxists emphasize on the problems of the base, the economic base. Then what Western Marxists do is that they concentrate on the problems of the superstructures, and their attention is centered on what? On culture, on philosophy, on art, literature, and all these things. Okay, so they primarily analyze all these things. Okay, they no doubt believe that there is a relation between the base and the superstructure. This is a Marxist idea they believe in, but they don't think that the base is the primary thing for kind of Marxist analysis. They believe that this superstructures is actually culture, philosophy, and art. These are so Western Marxism emphasized the importance of the study of culture, class consciousness, subjectivity, okay, for understanding any kind of society. So if you want to understand a particular society, Orthodox Marxism will say that okay, if you want to understand society, you have to understand the base. Only base will do. What is the mode of economic production? Okay, but Western Marxists say that this is not enough. You also have to analyze other things also. What are the other things? Culture, philosophy, art, class consciousness, subjectivity. Okay, for adequate understanding of a society, okay, you need to understand all these things. Okay, that's why Western Marxists use heavily use Marxist theories of ideology. Now, ideology is something which is a very important concept in understanding the superstructure. Okay, what the superstructure can only be understood very prominently by the by understanding the concept of ideology. Okay, ideology, commodity fetishism, okay, alienation. These are concepts which where Western Marxists try to emphasize rather than let's say the only the economic base. Okay, so because of analysis of all these things, they have come up with new concepts which they derive from Marx. Okay, for example, one concept that the Western Marxists try to emphasize again and again is a concept of reification. Last time I had mentioned this word reification. Reification, R-E-I-F-I-C-A-T-I, reification. Now, what is this reification? Okay, now reification, according to Western Marxists, is that capitalist societies, they produce something in the in the people. They produce something called commodity fetishism. So that means they believe that we are only attracted by a particular object when it is commodified, when it turns into a commodity. For example, a car, I told you last time. Okay, so as soon as we see a car, our whole concentration is on the features of the car. Okay, and we think that this is a beautiful car. It has the new car comes. For example, a new car has come. For example, Kia. For example, a new car, lot of features. So our entire focus on the is on the object. Okay, it is this is a fetish. We have a fetish for that object. Okay, but why? Because the ruling class, the capitalist class, what they do is that they want us that we should only concentrate only on the commodity itself. Okay, for example, when you buy a car, we are only interested in it. Iski mileage kitni hogi, whether they have this feature or not, whether there are LED lights or not. But the thing is that the product is not just the product. Okay, for the making of that product, a lot of human labor has also been put into it. The wages, the labor, all these things have gone into the making of this car, but we are hardly concerned with that. Okay, so the exploitation whether they have been paid or not. Okay, what are the working conditions of the people who produce this car? How much money do they get? All these things, are sidelined. And this is what we call, we are reified. Objects are reified. Human beings are reified. Social relations are reified. So how do this reification take place? All these things are actually Western Marxists try to understand. Or if, for example, the whole idea of alienation. Okay, what is alienation? According to Marxists, they say that the product that is there in the market, whatever it is there, what happens? The worker produces it, but the worker does not own it. He is alienated from it. Why doesn't he own it? Because he cannot claim that my product. For example, he's a pre-industrial society, pre-capitalist society. What happens? If there was a potter, now the potter used to make a pot. Okay, a pot, a complete pot. So he could claim that this pot is made by me, this complete pot, this product is mine, I have made it. But in industrial societies, because of technology, one product is not made by one single person. If many people put in their work to make a product, for example, a car. So you say one worker cannot claim that I have made this car. Okay, so because some people have worked to make the engine, someone has done to the. So you see what happens is that the worker cannot claim that this product is mine. The person who is producing it, the product is not his. But a person, the capitalist, who does not put in his labor, only because he has factories, he has money, he can claim that this is mine. So what happens is that the worker automatically gets alienated from the product that he makes. This is what we call alienation. Okay, so alienation. So these are the issues that Western Marxists try to, talk about. Okay, so they engage with non-Marxist system like psychoanalysis and all these things. Okay, to understand the whole idea of the. And as I've already said, the idea of ideology is central to Western Marxism, the idea of ideology. Now, in order to understand what ideology is, okay, and because today we'll talk about Lukács's whole idea of ideology, this notion of ideology, okay, that they get it from Karl Marx. Now, for Karl Marx, ideology, what is ideology? Ideology refers to the ways in which society as a whole adopts the idea and interests of the dominant economic class. This is what he calls ideology. For example, society as a whole, a society has, according to Marx, it has bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the working class and the entrepreneurs, for example. So ideology means that the society as a whole, they adopt, they appropriate the ideas, the interests of the dominant economic class. Okay, so so Marx's model of ideology, it rests upon certain historical materialist perspectives, okay, which asserts that material reality, the reality that you see around, the material reality is the foundation of social consciousness. That our social consciousness is not something which is God-given or which is given genetically to us, but our social consciousness is determined by the material reality that surrounds us, the material reality. Okay, it is through the dominant ideologies. Okay, the dominant in a capitalist society, it is through the dominant ideologies of capitalism that the working class take for granted their exploitation. Okay, so what happens? What Marx is trying to say is that the dominant ideology of a particular period, okay, of capitalism, the working class, what they do is that they take for granted their exploitation. They are exploited, but they think that is natural. Okay, it is very natural that we are exploited. So exploitation becomes something which they accept is as natural. So this is what ideology is all about. They think that हाँ exploitation, हम तो गरीब है, माई बाप हमारा वही है, और so हम उनके नौकरी करते हैं, तो naturally हम, they think that my poverty is because I am born poor, or I must have done something wrong in my previous birth, that's why I am poor this time. Okay, so this exploitation, although they work, but they take for granted their exploitation, okay, within economic structures of inequality. So within a capitalist system of a mode of production, the most important social relations are those between whom? Between members of the working class, okay, as as they engage in kind of a productive labor, as well as the relation between the working class and the capitalist class. And this capitalist class are the ones who owns the more means of production, like factories, machines, they have all those things. So the the bourgeoisie class, what they do is that they own the means of production, understand, and the working class works there. Just because they may own the means of production, the working class thinks that my poverty is all right, okay, because I don't have all these things, understand. So this is one important thing. Okay, so through their ownership of the means of production, the capitalist, what did he gains? Power. Okay, so power to appropriate the labor of the working class, जो वो काम करता है, मेहनत करता है, because just because they have money, they have all the means of production, so they take that, they appropriate, they snatch away that labor of the working class. Why? Because the working class does not have the means to produce the necessities of their lives. Okay, so they appropriate food, clothing, shelter for themselves. So Marx ideology, it enters Marx, theoretical framework to explain how these working class, these subordinate classes, they take this exploitation, okay, or the exploitative relations, okay, as something which is natural, which is unchangeable, which is solid. So this is what ideology is all about. According to Marx, ideology is nothing but it is a false consciousness that the working class falsely believes, okay, because of the material condition, it falsely believes that their exploitation is justified. They take it as natural. Okay, so this is what Marx tried to say, that this through ideology, what the dominant class tries to do is that it tries to, it's a kind of brainwashing, let's say. You brainwash people, okay, that we are, this is enough for you. Okay, this is what political dispensation does. Okay, that now you are poor, so I won't allow you to die. Okay, so I will give you some food to eat. So ration baant diye, for example. So we are all very happy that that at least we are not able to die. Okay, so that whole, so you see, but do the people actually, the working class, do they deserve only the ration in that sense? No, but we think that because just the survival has been granted by the dominant economic class, what happens is that we think that it is very natural. So this is false consciousness. We only deserve this. Okay, mere bhagya mein itna hi hai. That is what we think. This is what false consciousness. So he says this is how actually the power structure of a particular society is kept intact, according to Marx. Okay, so this is one. So one way in which this kind of a consent is achieved, is accomplished, in the way in which objects, okay, the objects with we use, okay, or objects with use value becomes commodities. Okay, commodity. So what capitalism does is that the objects that are jiska use value hai, what Marxism does, what capitalism does is that it turns them into commodities. Okay, it commodities, and commodities ka kya hai? Commodities have exchange value. Okay, so there is a use value, there is a exchange value. For example, the use value of wood, for example, the use value of lakdi jo hota hai, the use value of wood may be realized if I build a house, or the use value of an apple, for example, is realized when I eat it, for example. Okay, but exchange value का मतलब क्या है कि exchange value refers to the social labor that is required to produce the same objects for a capitalist economy. Okay, so this move from use value to exchange value, okay, what happens is that, removes from the visibility the role of human labor in producing this value. So what happens is, what capitalism does is that it employs workers in such a manner that the worker produces something, okay, and gives it to the capitalists, okay, and in exchange the capitalist gives them some wages. Okay, so I produce a product, or the working class produce a product, and what do I do? जिसका value बहुत है, for example, car का value बहुत है, okay, but what do? The worker does not sell it in the market. The worker gives it to the company for sale, and the company is owned by the capitalists. And the capitalists in return give them certain, wages, which is far less than the product of the value of the car actually. So you see, this is where how the rich becomes richer and richer and richer, and the poor becomes poorer and poorer and poorer. But this is naturalized. How is it naturalized? By the concept of ideology. Okay, that the working class puts into the brains of this working class, the capitalist class, they put them that this is what you deserve. Okay, this is what you deserve. The working class has produced for example, a product which is 5 lakh rupees. But in exchange, what does he give? He just gets 10,000 rupees. So 5 lakhs rupees and 10,000 rupees. But when I get that 10,000 rupees, I am very happy. But the value that I have given to that thing is much more than that. Okay, the value of the car, and the capitalist will sell that in 7 lakh rupees. So he is getting a huge profit. Okay, but the working class does not revolt against this. Okay, why? Because they are, conditioned in such a manner. Okay, through ideological systems, they have conditioned in such a manner that they think that 10,000 rupees that they are getting as salary is enough for me actually for producing that product. This is how it is done. It is done through ideological forces. And what are these ideological forces? Different religion, literature, culture, songs, and everything that go on, law, all these things go on to actually form the ideology of that. Okay, so this is what the whole question. So through this process, this elite social groups, they naturalize capitalist relations of production. Workers or working class, they come to view capitalist mode of production as the only viable option. This is very natural, where they must sell their labor power to the capitalist in order to obtain their daily bread or commodities. Okay, so ideology then functions to secure what? The participation of the subordinate classes in the exploitative relations of production. Okay, so the function of ideology is to secure the participation, that they let them come to the office, let them work. Okay, and then when they come to work, what they are basically doing is that they are participating in their own exploitation. Okay, so so this is one thing. So this function, so this is what the whole idea of ideology is all about in Marxist case. Okay, in Karl Marx. Now, the first, if you look at it, the essay, you will see the first theoretician that is being discussed is a person called George Lukács, who was a Hungarian thinker, okay, and a aesthetician who played a very significant role in the development of Western Marxism. Okay, now as I have already said, the Western Marxists are opposed to the doctrines of the Soviet Marxists. Okay, now George Lukács's book, History and Class Consciousness, it propagates, it advocates a more human. Okay. Now, this Hungarian thinker, George Lukács, who is credited to have been one of the founders of Western Marxism, okay, he advocates a more humanist approach to class struggle in contrast to the Soviet model. If you remember Soviet model, that is a very tough kind of a Marxism, the class struggle. Okay, so but unlike many Soviet thinkers, okay, what George Lukács does, he rejected the whole idea of Soviet Marxism's concept that revolution or communist revolution is inevitable. So he rejected the inevitability of revolution because he was of the view that revolution automatically nahi hota. Okay, it is not inevitable. Revolution had to be a very conscious process. It has to be a very creative process. It should not be a very, let's say, dogmatic, just a mechanical process. The revolution karna hai, isliye revolution aisa nahi hona chahiye. It has to be a conscious and a creative process. It cannot be a coercive process. You cannot just, let's say, impose revolution on a particular society. It has to come within the society, revolution. Whereas the Soviet model says that no, we should revolve. Revolution is inevitable. And George Lukács is saying no. Okay, Lukács is for Lukács. Ideology is what? What is ideology, George Lukács? It is a projection of the class consciousness of the capitalist class. Okay, remember, be careful. Okay, Lukács ke liye ideology is what? It is a projection of the class consciousness of the bourgeoisie class, of the capitalist class. And what does this class do? This class actually functions. So this ideology, what it does it do? It functions to prevent the working class from attaining real consciousness about themselves. So what George Lukács is trying to say is that, listen, ideology, what is an ideology? He says the ideology is just the projection of the class consciousness of the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie means the capitalist class, the haves, okay, which functions to prevent, to stop the proletariat or the working class from actually attaining a real consciousness of its revolutionary position. Okay, so ideology determines the form of objectivity. Okay, so that is what. So what Lukács is trying to say is that, okay, so it is, if you look at Lukács, he emphasizes that what ideology does is that if, for example, if there is a particular society, so उस particular society का what will be the ideology of that society? the ideology of that society will be the ideology of the class consciousness of the bourgeoisie class or the capitalist class, okay, and which the working class has appropriated. Why it has appropriated? It is done in such a manner that the working class will never be able to realize that they have certain actually revolutionary potential in themselves. Okay, so this is how it is done. It is done through the superstructure of a particular society. What is the superstructure? I told you: literature, culture, religion, music, law, education. All this belongs to the super. So through educational system, through religion, through literature, all these things, what the bourgeoisie class does is that it tries to prevent the working class from attaining its, that they are capable of revolution or revolting against this kind of exploitation. So what is Lukács's idea? That Lukács is saying that how it is done through different methods, through reification, through commodity fetishism, and all these things. How reification? Because the capitalists will, what they will do is that they will produce something, okay, in the they will bring a new product into the market, and the working class will say, wow, what a product, lovely product. And so their whole thing, emphasis is on the product itself, forgetting that in the production of things, their labor has been actually being exploited. Okay, they have produced a car, or they have produced a television, or they have produced a computer because of their work. Okay, and the computer, and the computer sells for 50,000 rupees in the market. Okay, and we said, what now, lovely feature and all those things. Okay, but in exchange, what have they got? They have got a minimum wage of 5,000 rupees, 7,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees. So 45,000 rupees, actually, what are the difference? This the capitalist takes away. But the capitalist does not want that the working class or the person who has worked in from making this computer will realize that actually he has worked so much. So he does this kind of reification, these advertisements that you see in the television. What are they? They are all forms of reification. Okay, so through reification, what the capitalist class does is it tries to, so ideology is actually determines the structure of knowledge itself. Okay, the knowledge that this is a car, okay, the knowledge that this is good for me. So that ideology determines knowledge itself. Knowledge does not determine ideology. Ideology determines knowledge. And when the working class take this knowledge, okay, appropriates this knowledge, okay, adopts this knowledge, what happens is that they are prevented from actually looking at their own exploitation. Okay, and they think that they take it for granted. Okay, so he writes, okay, so he writes in one of the, in that essay, it is only when the core of being has showed itself as social becoming that the being itself can appear as a product. So in the process of reification, they themselves think as their products. Okay, so this is one. So Lukács, he emphasizes the problem of reification. So due to the let's say commodity nature of capitalist society, because capitalist society believes in a commodity nature, they commodifies everything. Even human relations are commodified in capitalist society. How? Because you go into a relationship only in a capitalist society when you think that there is some kind of advantage. If faida ho, then this relationship works. Okay, so this is one thing. So Lukács asserts that social relations also in capitalist society, they become objectified. Okay, so what happens is that it stops the ability for a spontaneous emergence of a class consciousness among the proletariat. So ideology is made in such a manner that the working class will never be able to actually have their own class consciousness. Because if they have their own class consciousness, they will realize that they are being exploited. So what ideology does is that it tries to prevent. Okay, so this is how George Lukács tries to see the whole concept of ideology here. Okay, in his book History of Class Consciousness, History and Class Consciousness, that that it is a form of projection of the class consciousness of the bourgeoisie. Even the working class thinks that the bourgeoisie or the capitalist or the जो have say uski class consciousness, meri class consciousness. They think that I am, he is happy looking at the car, I am also happy looking at the car. But that is not the thing. Okay, their perceptions differ. For example, a person who is a capitalist, the way he looks at a new product is very different than the way actually a working class does. But what happens is that the working class is trained in such a manner that he thinks, or he or she thinks, that the class consciousness of the let's say the capitalist class, the rich people, are also the the class consciousness of my class also. Okay, so that means this whole business is to hide things. Okay, hide this exploitation. So the whole ideology is actually what? This ideology is actually a process of hiding the realities, real conditions of how this exploitation takes place. Okay, so this is what the whole the emphasis, let's say the emphasis on of let's say George Lukács is all about. I told you he's a Hungarian thing, and Lukács has a lot of essays. Okay, if you look at this essay, you will find that the crux of this thing is this. Okay, the crux of this whole idea of ideology lies in this. But after that, okay, after that, what happened? The other thinker who is very important in the study of literature, in the study of culture, in post-colonial studies. Okay, so the thinker, his name is Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci, who carries forward the ideas of Lukács. Okay, he carries forward. Now, Gramsci, his only work that is available to us is called Prison Notebooks. Prison Notebooks. Okay, which were written between 1929 and 1934, and it was published in 1971. Okay, now this Prison Notebooks is the first attempt, theoretical attempt, not practical attempt, it's the first theoretical attempt to understand why revolutions fail. Okay, why the proletarian revolution failed in European countries. Okay, you see, Gramsci was himself the leader of the Italian Communist Party, okay, who revolted against, let's say, Mussolini. So what happens is that following the failure of the Italian workers to come to power through revolution after the First World War, Gramsci, who was I told you, was the leader of the Italian Communist Party, he was imprisoned by Mussolini. Okay, Mussolini's fascist government. Okay, now very interestingly, what happened was that because he was put in jail, this confinement gave him the freedom to re-evaluate many of the doctrines of Marxism, which were actually imposed by Soviet Union. All these people got inspired by the Russian Revolution, so they adopted the method of Russian Revolution to overthrow their government in Europe, but they did not succeed. So, and they were put in prison. So Gramsci was put in prison. Okay, and when he was in prison for such a long time, he got the freedom to, let's say, re-evaluate many of the doctrines which were, imposed by the Moscow or Soviet Marxism. Now, just like Lukács, as I've already told you, Gramsci, he rejected the idea of materialist determination. Materialist determination means that the Orthodox Marxists believe that everything is determined by the base. Now, Gramsci understood that if everything is determined by the base, then the revolution would have succeeded. But the very fact that the revolution has not succeeded That means everything is not actually determined by the base. Okay. Now, given his situation, that is Gramsci's situation, it was very obvious that there was nothing inevitable about the victory of the proletariat, because my Orthodox Marxism believes that revolution, if there is revolution, revolution will succeed. But revolution failed. So naturally, there is something wrong with this whole idea of inevitability of the victory of the proletariat. Okay, the revolution had failed. So despite the fact that all the other conditions were conducive for revolution, the failed. So Gramsci, therefore, what he did was that he tried to find out the reasons for the defeat, or defeat of this revolution, in very subjective and ideological explanation he tried to give. Okay, Gramsci believed that revolutions, while they may be, let's say, facilitated by certain shifts in economic structure, okay, but revolutions are also fought out, and their outcomes are decided on the level of ideology. So revolution is not just overthrowing a government because the economic structure has changed. No, he's saying that revolutions are also fought on the level of ideologies. Okay, so he tried to find out, he gave a lot of attention to the conflicts between different systems of the ideas. He said that ideas are very important. Okay, so he went back to the whole concept of ideology, okay, as propounded by Marx. Now, the concept of ideology as used by Marx, I've already told you, okay, shows that social power, that means the power in society, okay, how does it operate? It operates through the cultural coordinates or cultural realm of society. For example, social power, who is more powerful in a particular society? He's saying that although person who is rich is powerful, but that is not very apparent. Now, social power operates on the level of culture. Okay, in the level of culture. So ideological systems, it works to integrate people into this social network, understand, and of oppression and subordination. Okay, so this model of ideology, that ideology is actually responsible for the subordination of class, this is a very limited, and Gramsci thought that no, this is not actually the case. This is not actually the case. So what he did was, so he went back to Marx, and he tried to see that it's a very different kind of thing. So Gramsci builds upon the Marxist theoretical tradition, and he introduces a new concept, which is called hegemony. Okay, it is called hegemony. Okay, he tries to, his notion of hegemony. Okay, so this notion of hegemony, the idea of hegemony that he introduces, represents a very important reinterpretation of the concept of ideology. He takes the whole idea of ideology, no doubt, from Marx and from other thinkers, but he tries to reinterpret and brings in a new concept called hegemony. Now, this notion of hegemony, okay, is rooted in Gramsci's distinction between two things. Okay, one thing is coercion, that is C-O-E-R-C, that means jabardasti karna, coercion, that is easy, okay, and consent. So there are two different things. So powerful people in a particular society adopt these two things. One thing is coercion, and the other to coerce someone, jabardasti karna, and there is consent. Okay, so social power in a particular society is maintained by these two things. What are they? Coercion and consent. Coercion matlab kya hai? It is the capacity for subduing people through violence. For example, police. Okay, that is coercion. Okay, which it can use against those who refuse to actually participate in this capitalist relations of production. For example, I'll give you an example. If there are workers working and they go on strike, that no, we will not work. And if they sit on dharna, for example, what happens? Or the students sitting on dharna, for example, they said हमारा demand पूरी नहीं की जा रही है. So what happens is that, so the state or the government or the institution, what it will do is that it will coerce some people. It will, it will call the police. Understand? So, and all this through violence. Okay, this is one thing. So, that means those who refuse to participate in this capitalist relations of production with government. But there is another thing. By contrast, hegemonic power, क्या करता है? Hegemony, it tries to convince the individuals and the social classes to obey or subscribe to the values and norms of an inherently exploitative society. There are two things. Just this, I'm making it very clear to you. This is what Gramsci says, that there are two ways of controlling a society. One is through power. Okay, one is through power. For that, you use the police, the army, and whatever against people who refuse to participate in this kind of exploitative relations. Okay, उसके ऊपर ये law लगा दिया और क्या, whatever, रासुका लगा दिया, सब whatever. Okay, that is one thing. You लाठी charge करवा दिया. These are different things. Okay, but there is another thing which is more subtle. Why the other thing is used? Because you cannot control people through power and violence for a very long time. Okay, because once they grow in number, what will they do is that they will try to overthrow you. Okay, if you are planning to have a lathi charge, they will face the lathi charge till they don't have a lathi with them. So once they acquire a lathi, they will also start doing these things. So this is not going to last for long. Okay, so there is another method of social control. What is it? It is consent. That you convince the people that whatever is happening, whatever laws we are doing for all these things, okay, it is for your good only. You convince individuals, you convince the entire classes to subscribe to those values, to subscribe to those norms, okay, which actually helps them in their own exploitation. And this is a very, very powerful method, and this is where revolutions fail. This is why revolutions fail. Why? Because in a particular society, what happens is, in a particular society, we ourselves, people who are exploited, they consent to their own exploitation. They give consent to their own exploitation. It is a form of social power that relies on voluntarism, that you voluntarily say and you voluntarily participate in your own exploitation rather than the threat of punishment or disobedience. Okay, hegemony appears as something called common sense. Now people think that it's very common sense. So the mechanism is done in such a manner that you think your exploitation is a common sense. It is very commonsensical. We think that, कैसे बात करते हो भाई? Okay, जिसके पास लैंड है, जिसके पास मशीन है, उसको ना फायदा मिलेगा, हमको क्यों मिलेगा? Okay, this is we think. It is very natural, right? It is very natural that our exploitation. Why should we expect so much money? Because we don't have the means of production. Okay, so this is appears as common sense, but the product is actually made by people. I will give you another important thing. Okay, we think that loyalty to the institution in which we work is something very natural. Okay, loyalty. We think that it is natural. We think that institution is paying us salary, so we should be loyal to them. But actually, so this is inherently what it is done is that what happens is that the institution at the state can make you do anything in the name of larger interest. Larger interest ke liye you should do all these things. So you are participating in your own exploitation. For example, if your working hour is 6 hours, okay, so 6 hours you are getting paid for 6 hours. Okay, but what happens is that now your boss says that come on, अरे कुछ ज्यादा काम है, 8 बजे तक रुक जाओ. Okay, अरे वो ऑफिस की बात है 8 बजे, and you think that yes, office is in crisis, so I should be loyal. So what if after all the office gives me money? So we are actually, what we are doing is that we are responsible for our own exploitation. This is what called hegemony. Okay, whereas the coercive power, the violent power, is the exclusive domain of the state police. You know, the institutions of civil society, such as the schools, university, media, family, okay, they are the ones who are responsible for producing and spreading this hegemonic power. So hegemonic power, that is, what is hegemonic power? Hegemonic power is that kind of a power which, produces consent from people that, you exploit yourself. And this is done by, schools, university, media, family, friendships, and all these things. Okay, so in industrial capitalist societies, Gramsci says hegemonic power is the prevalent form of social power. Okay, the state relies only on power, physical power, only in exceptional cases. But in all other time, it believes in hegemony. That we have done so much for you, won't you do this for me? This is hegemonic power. Okay, in times of crisis, we have always stood for you. Okay, so you should do this for me. Extra work, you should do this for me. Okay, so this is called hegemonic power. So this hegemonic power is something that states try to, or the capitalist society. Okay, so this Gramsci, what he does is that he ascribes a greater degree of importance to the cultural superstructure. Okay, so he's saying it is this superstructure, not the base. It is the superstructure which is responsible for the production and dissemination or spreading of hegemonic power. Okay, the superstructure does not simply just reflect the economic base. Okay, so that means there is a kind of a meaningful degree of autonomy of the superstructure. This means that the ideas of the ruling class do not necessarily become the defining values of a society as a whole. Okay, so hegemonic power is a network of power. Okay, and this, what happens is, so this is how things are controlled in such a manner. Okay, because this contestation is basic to the process of constituting what is hegemony. Okay, so there is never a unified kind of a system of ideological domination. Okay, so this is another important thing. So hegemony is one way of how consent can be actually brought in. Okay, so hegemony, the hegemonic social power is responsible for, and this is why revolutions fail. This is how revolutions fail. For example, I'll give you example. For example, see the middle class. Okay, Marx never thought of a middle class, but we have a middle class. So if you see the policies, okay, most policies that the government does it is anti-middle class. For example, the middle class, salaried class that we see today, we always expect, whenever there is a budget, we always expect that there will be some relaxation in the income tax structure so that we don't have to pay much tax. We always expect, but it never happens. Okay, it hardly happens. Okay, even this budget also there was not. Okay, so we get angry. 2 or 3 days we get angry. Okay, but what happens is that, but yet we do not revolt against it. Why don't we revolt? We revolt because of this hegemony. Because the government comes up with a logic in the parliament or whatever, that these taxes that you are paying, that is for the nation. Okay, that is for the development of the nation. Okay, so this is for the larger interest of the nation. Okay, so what happens is that, so we pay our taxes, and we, through hegemonic power, what we do is that we pay, what, the consent that we give for our own exploitation. Okay, so this is what happens for Gramsci. One of the main issues, facing dominant social groups is how to maintain the necessary degree of this kind of hegemony to secure the consent of the people that is governed by the ruling class. Okay, so this is another important aspect of what we see the things. Understand? So this Gramscian model of hegemony, it differs from the Marxist notion of Orthodox Marxist notion of ideology. Okay, why? Because you see, it retains Marxist foundational categories of class and capitalist mode of production, but it is different. Okay, so what Gramsci does is that, Gramsci makes advances, okay, by showing the attention to hegemonic power. Okay, he says that, this hegemonic power is actually very implicit. It is passed off as something which is common sense. Okay, so common sense. Whereas in ideology, it was not passed off as common sense. Okay, in ideology, it was a kind of let's say a body of ideas which prevented you from knowing the reality. But in hegemony, what happens is there's a difference. The difference is this, that these things are passed off as common sense. Okay, so that what happens is that we don't ever question them because we don't question common sense. So these, this is the difference between theory of ideology and theory of hegemony. Theory of ideology means that the ruling class, it projects a kind of let's say consciousness, okay, which prevents us from knowing the truth, that we are capable of revolt. Whereas in hegemony, there is no attempt at preventing. Rather, they pass off these ideas as something which is very common sense, that exploitation is a kind of common sense. Okay, so this is rather than a coherent body of thought, which is inherently unfinished. Okay, so this is the difference between ideas. So it is this embodiment of hegemony in everyday common sense. Okay, so this hegemony is manufactured. How is it manufactured? Where is it manufactured? Now we say that it is manufactured in schools, it is manufactured in universities, it is manufactured in the family, it is manufactured in the church, because Gramsci uses the word church because he is in the Christian country. Okay, so what happens is that, so it is this hegemonic power is manufactured here, and it secures the consent of the classes, the working class. Now, what Gramsci uses the word is that subaltern classes. Okay, he's saying that these are the working class. So वो कहता है कि it is the subaltern classes, subaltern. Okay, so there's those people who are ruled. Okay, the word subaltern is very common these days. Okay, in post-colonial theory and all these things, you will find subaltern, the whole idea of subaltern. So this is the guarantee. So the subaltern classes. So this is how the hegemony. But again, he says that this hegemonic power is not absolute. These subaltern classes will one day, or whatever it is, will be able to produce counter hegemonic power. Okay, and this counter hegemonic power will help in the reconstitution and transformation of society. When these subaltern classes will have their own hegemonic power, okay, they will produce their own hegemonic power, then there will be transformation of society. Okay, so this is where the whole idea of ideology and how Gramsci alters the whole idea of ideology in his theory of, let's say, hegemony. Okay, so this is why. So there are three or more thinkers. Okay, which we will because I was said that I will be engaging you for 3 classes. So we have studied Lukács, we have studied Gramsci. Okay, so another very important thinker whose whole idea of ideology is essentially is that from Gramsci onwards is a person called Louis Althusser, who is a French Marxist thinker. Okay, so what does Alcuzar has to talk about uh, hegemony, ideology, and how does it differ from, let's say, um, Gramsci and Lukács? And then there is a series of thinkers from the Frankfurt School, which we will touch upon next time. Okay, Adorno, Horkheimer, and all these things, which is there in that essay. Okay, we will do, but majorly we will study Althusser next time. Okay, and we will be winding up when we meet you next time. Okay, so this
So
is what.
sorry to interrupt you. I would like to give a vote of thanks on behalf of all the research scholars. So
Okay.
thank you for your patience and for creating an environment and broadening our minds for this particular topic. Thank you, sir, for leading our discussion section and for facilitating such a positive learning environment, sir. Thank you so much.